Next up, we are incredibly honored to host Ambassador Eric Garcetti and Dr. Chris Howard of ASU. I would like to welcome them both up on stage along with Alan Arkatov of ASU, who will continue to introduce Ambassador Garcetti and Dr. Chris Howard.
It's my honor to introduce U.S. Ambassador to India, Eric Garcetti, and Arizona State University Executive Vice President and COO, Chris Howard. When Deborah and Michael were discussing who would be the right people to provide a keynote fireside discussion for this summit, the choice was obvious. Chris, because of his trailblazing life story, and Eric, because of the historic results his leadership has achieved. And together, because of their common bonds regarding education and public service and a long friendship. I thought of Chris when we were flying to Delhi on Sunday, and we were flying over the gorgeous mountain regions surrounding Kabul, knowing that he had received a Bronze Star for his service in Afghanistan. Thank you, Chris. As you'll see from his biography in the program, before coming to ASU, Chris had distinguished himself as a two-time college president after having been a corporate, military, and athletic leader. He is a visionary educator who has a unique ability to tie together disparate threads and achieve real results. Ambassador Garcetti's life has been one of extraordinary public service. As you'll see from his biography, his leadership locally, nationally, and internationally has been marked by a series of remarkable accomplishments. Whether it has been his ability to innovate government, bring together disparate viewpoints, or tackle the most intractable issues, the signature of Eric Garcetti has been his ability to get big, important things done, especially for the most underserved. Making the largest community college system in the United States free for students, thank you, Eric. Providing the global leadership on sustainability for C40, or bringing the Olympic Games to Los Angeles. These are just a few examples of what I like to call the Garcetti difference. When President Biden appointed Eric as ambassador to India, he did so knowing that no one would be better in addressing the massive, complex issues that come with this incredibly consequential role. I'm very proud to have watched up close and personal the kind of difference that Eric can make for millions of people. And I'm thrilled that he is now able to share his talents and expertise with the largest population in the world. Ladies and gentlemen, Chris Howard and Ambassador Eric Garcetti.
Alan, thank you very much for your leadership and those kind words. You know, Eric and I were concerned that Mrs. Garcetti and Mrs. Howard wouldn't get their notes to you in time to say such nice things about us, but evidently they did. So thank you very much, Alan, and thank you for your leadership and service as a new member of the ASU family. I am honored and delighted to be here with Ambassador Eric Garcetti, whom I've known for 30 years. We met when we were 2, because obviously we're very young, but we've known each other for decades, and I like to call him a brother from another mother. And I'm looking forward to having a conversation with him. And I wanted to start off with, Jenny, I hope we can get this picture up. Can we put the picture up? Is it gonna show? All right, look at those guys. All right, look at that, huh? I had no hair then, I have no hair now. You have less hair, but it looks really good. But the reason I put that was, we took that at Oxford, and I was thinking I was finishing up my doctorate, and Eric came out and watched me pick that up. But I put that up there because there's been a journey from that Eric Garcetti, the young whippersnapper who had been the campaign manager for your dad's campaign, who was talking to me about serving in the Army or the Navy, who had come from a Columbia and had such a great, servant leader mindset. But I want to talk about your origin story, Eric. So Ambassador Garcetti, tell us the arc and journey of how you got to this chair.
Well, let me first start by thanking you, Alan, for the overly kind introduction. People say you should just leave the stage after an introduction that good, and say what a joy it is to be with my dear friend Chris Howard, who our lives have intersected like this constantly. Somebody who when I know he's going to be a part of anything, I sign up even before I know what the topic is. And I've also been a part of a lot of fireside chats in my life, been a part of a lot of keynote speeches, but I've never been part of a keynote fireside chat or a fireside keynote. So I'm really interested to see what this is going to be. But I'm very excited to be here at the intersection of education and commerce, at the intersection of the United States and America, at the intersection of our past and our future. And in many ways, India kind of, let me answer that question you asked me by going through kind of an India lens, which is to say, I first came here when I was 14 years old. I grew up, I'm a hybrid of sorts. You can't be really an American, and I would offer an Indian without really being a hybrid of different cultures. Somebody with an Italian last name whose family came from Mexico, fleeing as refugees in war. Mother's side is Jewish, also refugees fleeing from discrimination from the Russian Empire, who over 100 years ago found themselves in Los Angeles, probably arguably one of the handful of most dynamic cities, not only in the world today, but in human history. And I think for a lot of people, they ask, well, when you grow up with a lot of different strains, isn't that confusing? And I think for those of us who have grown up mixed and kind of border crossers, as I call us, it's quite the opposite. You feel comfortable almost anywhere. I see the streets of the world I see the face of the world on the streets of a Los Angeles that I grew up in. But that also prepared me for being 14 years old and coming to the streets of New Delhi and seeing the face of LA on the streets of India. Because if you grow up with that as your template, you kind of have a comfort. In fact, when you don't have it, you can't help but notice it. You can't help notice, no criticism, the last amazing panel, when a panel is all men, or when you go and you see a place where everybody's in one culture, when people don't have rights to things like democracy, things that are challenging to achieve. Democracy is much tougher than dictatorship. Diversity is much tougher than a monochromatic culture, but none of us would want to have it any other way. And so I think my life journey has been really a navigation of crossing borders between industries, between jobs, and now at this moment helping build this bridge between the two largest democracies in the world, the largest and the oldest democracy, two countries that I think have not an additive but a multiplicative relationship, where if you do US times India or India times the US, when we get together it's exponential. But I don't know, my life has mostly been a series of decisions, last-minute decisions to do things because I think I would regret not having done them. So whether it's joining the Navy, whether it was running for political office as a council member and mayor, saying yes to the president for ambassador, my test usually is don't plan life too far ahead. The moment of, is it something that's good for you and your loved ones, and are you going to regret not doing it? Because we should all live life with no guilt and no regrets.
Well, beautifully said. And one thing you should not have any regrets about is your, and as Alan alluded to, your serious body of work as a leader of Los Angeles now. There are tough jobs, and there are tough jobs. That is a tough job. Tell us a little bit about that, Eric. Tell us a little bit about being the mayor of Los Angeles, what you feel most excited about, what you were able to accomplish. I see that wonderful pin for the U.S. Olympics, the Olympics and the Paralympics, and being able to bring that to Los Angeles. But I know the audience would love to hear about, what it was like being the mayor of L.A. and what you're most proud of.
I think it was Bill Clinton who once said the two best jobs in American politics are president of the United States and mayor of a big city. Because these chief executive roles where you can find the people, it's kind of like running companies. For those of you who are businessmen and women, I think it's kind of your chair, your portfolio manager, your CEO, and your chief communications officer all at once. So you have a portfolio, in my case, of 42 companies, the largest port in the Western Hemisphere, the third busiest airport in the world, the second largest police department. You have influence over the second largest school district. You have influence over the largest community college district. So it's really influencing and finding people who can run the companies of these huge enterprises, one. Two, it's setting a vision, which I love doing. I mean, it's funny, when you run for office, you got one chance, and whenever you are, I know it's election year here in India, so here's some advice, and it's election year for us. When candidates are running for office, that's the time you can get them to promise things. So use your vote, spend it wisely, and it's almost the time when you can co-architect what the future of your polity, of your congregation is going to be moving forward. And I love trying to find the story of a city, of a nation, of a relationship. We don't think as storytellers, as leaders, often enough. We think as, money, number crunchers. We think about processes, processes, implementers, we think about kind of systems improvements, technology innovations. These are all critical. You cannot do anything without them. But really, everything flows, I think, from finding a story and getting human beings to believe that story, to follow that story, and to co-write that story. And being mayor really was about that. Finding a city as diverse as Los Angeles and saying, what are our values? So when we were bidding for the Olympics, I had to go up against other cities, and we literally had to say who we were. Not just what we could do, but who we were. So we're about freedom, we're about creativity, we're about reinvention, because we'd always reinvented the Olympics, been games changers in 1932, 1984, we saved the Olympic movement. But more broadly for a city, getting people to find what they have in common at a moment when we mostly have a world that finds what we're against. And the last piece, which is then going out and selling it, and keeping talent accountable. You know, I think it's very easy to be an elected official. Once you're elected, people say, whether you are or not, oh my God, you're amazing, until the day they vote you out of office, because you're not. And if you don't listen to that very carefully, or when you don't listen to that very carefully, you're a better leader. Because things aren't always good. Leaders get dehumanized in good and bad ways. For those of us who are CEOs or mayors, ambassadors, like, they stand up when you come in the room, they applaud you after you speak, they laugh at your jokes, you think yourself to be smarter, better looking, and funnier than you actually are. So it's important to kind of
until they vote you out of office. And
I mean, yeah, exactly. I mean, and by the way, you're very smart, you're very handsome, and you know, you're very
thank you,
accomplished,
Eric. I
talented.
appreciate that.
I'm saying that as a friend. But if you believe that hype too much, you kind of get dehumanized in a good way, because people are like, you're amazing. You also get dehumanized in a bad way. People say, oh my gosh, you know, there was a shooting yesterday in my city, that's your fault. There's somebody who's homeless or unhoused, that's your fault. And you have to be able to not take either too seriously. Because for all of us, whether it's a large company, whether it's an educational enterprise, whether it's running a city or a country or a state, it is our collective responsibility, and you're empowered for that moment to play a specific job. People want you to connect. And I would say the most defining moments weren't just the highs of like winning the Olympics, but the lows of dealing with a pandemic. And having to, in people's moment of greatest fear, greatest panic, the worst moment collectively of our city's history, certainly of our life, is to find people to have purpose, agency, direction, and hope when they have none of those. And to me, that is, I think, really what leadership is about.
Well, I love being at a technology conference and talking about these deeply humanistic characteristics and values, because leadership matters. I don't care if you're doing the tech thing or leading a university or leading a city. So I appreciate, Mr. Ambassador, you bringing that up. And I love watching you. I was running Robert Morris University in Pittsburgh. I watched you on TV in LA, getting things happening in the county, getting testing out, and I was taking some notes. So I appreciate that. But let's talk about deeply human leaders. I mentioned this with my new friend from Chikara University. We just signed an agreement with him over at the Trident Hotel about two people that India and the United States have in common, and that's Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Gandhi. So 55 years ago was my birthday. Yay, literally to the day. But 65 years ago.
It was his birthday yesterday. Can we wish him a happy
yesterday.
birthday?
Thank you.
Happy
They
birthday,
sang
Chris.
yesterday. They gave me a cake. They're like, this guy won't shut up. I mean, they sang to me yesterday. The president of the University of Miami gave me a cake. So I was born 55 years ago. 65 years ago, February 10th, 1959, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. arrived here in Delhi. And I was saying in a previous press junket a few minutes ago that he said, I was traveling in these other regions, Mr. Ambassador. I was traveling as a traveler, but I came here as a pilgrim, on a pilgrimage because of Gandhi. So there were two great leaders, one from America, one from India. This is for you all in India, this is Black History Month, right? This is African American History Month. Black people, we get 1 month out of all the year. That's a joke. The shortest month of the year, that's right. That's a bad joke, but no. But in all seriousness, Gandhi and King, and you're talking about values and very humanistic values about leadership. I'd love you to reflect as the U.S. ambassador to India, having been the mayor of L.A., as a former naval officer. What do they mean to you in terms of your leadership arc and your journey? Because they're so, and I think, important in terms of the standard bearers, as it were.
So in my office at the U.S. Embassy here, I have a big poster of Dr. Martin Luther King in his office. And in his office is a picture of Mahatma Gandhi. And so it's a picture of a picture, if you can have a picture of the picture of the picture. And it inspires me every single day, that kind of improbable intersection. And it teaches me how, they never met personally, but how wisdom passes from person to person, from generation to generation, from struggle to struggle. I would answer that in two ways. I would say, one, it's fascinating to me to see that connection over time of how courage and nonviolence, of ethics in action in the midst of conflict, is rare but incredibly powerful. One of the most powerful, I don't want to say weapons because it's nonviolence, one of the most powerful
Tools, maybe?
one of the most powerful jewels that human beings have ever found, mined out of the walls of our history. And to me, to see that, it's also personal. I was 21 years old just before we met, and I went to work in the jungles of Burma, where a recently retired U.S. Army military attaché who had watched the Burmese government crack down viciously on its own population and shoot students and others and monks and ethnic minorities as they just asked for their election, their votes to be upheld when they were voting for democracy. And so after that crackdown, he and another individual who helped run a group called Nonviolence International went to the jungles of Burma to teach everyday citizens how to recognize the power that they had. And they drew from Gandhi, they drew from King, and we drew from every incident of nonviolent resistance that human beings have put together through a guy named Dr. Gene Sharp. And it changed my life because here I was with members of the underground in Burma, students, 21-year-old, my peers, who were putting their lives on the line for the most basic things we took for granted in our democracy. So there's a direct link. The second thing is, though, you know, it's funny, to my earlier point, we dehumanize in bad ways, but also in good ways. We forget that these people are human beings and not heroes. And I always want to resist, when people always ask you when you're being interviewed, who are your heroes, especially when you get to have certain titles, people are like, tell us your heroes. My heroes are very flawed people, and I think it's important for us to remember that they're flawed people. You know, we have this re-examination in India sometimes of Mahatma Gandhi's flaws, certainly in the United States, Martin Luther King. And to me, that doesn't weaken them. It actually strengthens them and makes them more relatable to us and asks us to be heroes, maybe never in ways that will be written about or lifted up. But because we need heroes so badly, we kind of distill everything else about them that was human to just talk about their brilliance as if they're demigods. And to me, what makes Gandhi and King so powerful is that they were everyday people with extraordinary skills at important moments who had amazing courage and ultimately paid the largest price for that. And I think for all of us, it should encourage us to have that courage, that humility, and also that connection, that isn't them, that can be us.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. You know, I just finished a great biography about Dr. King, and you know, he was a person without his challenges, without his flaws, like you said, but he just had this determination and grit and sort of a North Star, as we say in America. He had this sort of thing he was always moving toward, and he would even say, I'm flawed, I'm not perfect, but I need to do this, and what a wonderful way to encapsulate that. So he made his way here in 1959. You made your way here when you were 14. You also at Columbia, according to your bio, studied Hindi and also, I think not Hindi studies, but Indian studies or what have you. So you took some courses. So you didn't tell us why you came over when you were 14 years old. And I know the audience wants to know, so what the hell did you come to India for? And then why the hell did you study this stuff in Columbia? You knew you were going to be ambassador. So you said, I'm going to learn Hindi now because 30 years from now.
And then forget it all, so don't test me 30 years later. My parents were from opposite sides of the track, not just kind of culturally, but my dad grew up poor. My mom's family did pretty well in business, and but they both met as working at Pan Am Airlines, and they could travel for free for years. And if they had extra money in their pocket, they didn't buy a nicer house or get a better car. They took me and my sister on the road, not on vacations, but on trips to China right after Communist China opened up in 1983, here in 1985 when I was 14, to see the world, to understand it. And it wasn't about a luxury vacation, it was about actually opening up your eyes to history. We went to Egypt, we went to Rwanda before the genocide, we went to, you know, places that would make us grow. So I loved India, then cut to my first year in university, We're all assigned, at Columbia where I went to school, we all get a roommate that you don't know. My roommate's a guy named Jared Clark. Okay, we get through the first year, stay friends. Second year, I have to choose a language. I said, I went to India, I want to study Hindi and Urdu. I just kind of picked it because there was a good program. And then 2 months later, in our sophomore year, he said, guess what? My dad just became the US ambassador to India. Bill Clark, you want to go to India? And I said, yeah, I'd love India. So I came here, stayed at the ambassador's residence, spent the night there. We're now building a new embassy building, so I'll never sleep there as ambassador, so I live elsewhere because there's construction around it. But I slept here in Delhi, my second visit. My third act was to apply for my junior year abroad here. I was going to study Buddhist studies in Bodh Gaya, where Buddha was enlightened. Got accepted. Antioch College had a program here back when very few American colleges did. And, but then politics got in the way, and I ran for student council in New York. I got elected. Politician's only as good as his word. I said I'd serve, so I canceled my India dream. And I thought the dream of living in India had died and I'd never come here. But India had other plans for me and has a way of kind of finding you no matter where you are in the world and pulling you back. I think Joe Biden had something to do with it too. And suddenly the dream is coming true.
Oh, bravo, bravo. Interesting enough, Antioch College, that's the alma mater of Coretta Scott King, so that's kind of a fun connection. But wow, who knew? And by the way, was finishing up a book on John Kenneth Galbraith, and as I was doing my homework to talk to you again about this, Eric, the energy that you're bringing to this job is palpable, and they're saying this guy is as connected to the youth of India, the most connected, the U.S. ambassador most connected to the youth of India since John Kenneth Galbraith. So I think that's a high compliment for you, and thank goodness you're in the chair literally and figuratively. Well, let's pivot to a little bit about why they're here around technology and ed tech, and some of the things I'd like you to sort of speak to is, what does India need from this super smart, vibrant, very good looking, by the way, audience of venture capitalists and ed tech people and nonprofit leaders? What do they need now? What does this group need to give to India now?
So if you'll indulge me, let me attack this in two ways. And the first way might not make you happy and might be very different than what you've talked about. It's not going to make you unhappy. But as I listened up here to the practical elements of education, to the brilliant ways, which I'll get to in my second answer, that India, on technical education, the way we have this bridge built on engineering and science and medicine, and all the things that are really about how education can give us skills. I started scribbling down something, and I just want to read it, because I think one of the things that India and the US have together is more than just the brilliance of our operational, technological, and entrepreneurial spirits. I think I talk about the 4 Ps here in India: peace, prosperity, planet, and people, as centering the mission, the US mission in India. What can we do to promote peace with India, together with India? What can we do to expand our prosperity for our peoples and the world? What can we do to protect our planet from climate and health challenges? And our people, which is education, culture, everything. But I add a 5th piece sometimes, which is principles. And I'm always worried, and I'm sure you had plenty of discussion around this, but the purpose of education, when I was thinking through, am I a pro-degree or anti-degree person long-term, and the debate that was going on here, is what we're missing in the world right now is the building of social community. We don't know how to manage our democracies. They're challenged sometimes. We don't know how to manage disagreement. Technology has unleashed all sorts of amazing ways to connect in really terrible ways, where technology is being used to divide us, being used to monitor us, being used to make us unhealthy instead of connect us and protect us or detect for us the things that we need. So I wrote about the things that I value in an education, which is a social community, learning discourse, debate, disagreement in a convivial way. Diversity being something you don't read about, but that you experience in 3 dimensions with real people, not on a chat board or in a comment section. Belonging being something that you have to build, a community of belonging that you have to build. An enforced belonging in an arbitrary but curated community that is different than most of the communities you will be in for the rest of your life or came from before that, kind of the way the military does. A forced exposure to things you would never study, being forced those requirements of the things you don't want to study, that you do, whether it's creative and cultural art requirements, a foreign language, the things that are kind of dying out. ethical education, your physical health, philosophical inquiry. To me, I hope that America and the United States, as we pursue these stronger ties in education, can also give some moral and ethical content to that mission, and not just one in which we're skills building and expanding opportunity, critical things for our material well-being. That's the first half. I don't know if I made you angry, but I wanted to insert that. Second is,
Thank you, Eric.
the United States and India are like, I don't know, if our Facebook status for a long time was it's complicated, we're definitely dating now.
Yeah, that's
And we're kind of figuring each other's habits out. In fact, I said recently, I think our hearts have been aligned much longer than we knew. Like when we finally found each other, Indians have known this about America, but Americans are pretty ignorant about India and Indians in comparison to Indians about America and Americans. But we're beginning to explore that much more as Americans. And we're like, wow, our hearts really do match. And increasingly we think alike. We think a lot of that kind of entrepreneurialism, democracy, diversity. Sometimes there's divergences, but we mostly think alike. The question now is, can we move alike? If our heads and our hearts are aligned, can our feet be aligned? Can our governments get rid of those regulations that make it difficult for American institutions to come here? A nut that ASU, here you can record this for the video, ASU, a nut that you have cracked, you know, as you come in with a dozen plus campuses here, like you are going to be exhibit A of how we don't let rules get in the way of expanding and deepening these relationships among two different systems. Indians have well navigated that into the United States, mostly in graduate school programs, but how can we do that into undergraduate programs more? And then as we look at the ways where we don't actually physically have to cross oceans to come together, what can we do to align skills, degrees, certificates, you know, what you call skilling, what we call job training together, so that when we have, for instance, an Indian doctor who's now American who heads up our White House counter-narcotics and drug policy work, when he's talking about, wouldn't it be great for India to have mental health care workers that can help us with our opioid and mental health crisis in the United States, and maybe one day create visas that would bring workers from India, as we did with Filipino nurses when we had a nursing shortage. Like, think about how great it would be to have already accredited degrees or certificates from here that allowed that to happen, and guaranteed visas, music to a lot of Indians' ears, to come to the United States and fill a need that will make us healthier and bring back that experience to India, where mental health is still nascent and can kind of begin to grow. So those ways which we can align the needs so that education is not just about those who are pretty well off becoming better, even better off, maybe trickling some down to really the creaming the top of the opportunity students who come from lower income areas or cultural backgrounds or languages or religions that are minorities, and saying, okay, you're the best of your group, you can come on this journey, but kind of mainstreaming what we can do together. And I think one third thing I'll say is I'm really excited about the possibility of the US and India talking about girls' education and women's education, because if you look at the participation, the workforce participation rate of women here in India, in the paid workforce, many women are in the informal and of course agricultural workforce where they do most of the work, the participation rate percentage-wise is lower here than in Saudi Arabia. And India, I know we have a prime minister who's very committed to expanding gender opportunities. We have a country that has led the way on many of these things, but still a statistical gap. So what can we do in both countries to really achieve equity so girls don't drop out of school when they're in primary school, they stay through middle school and high school, and that we can see even in the students that come to us, because it's 43% are women coming to the United States, 57% male students, even as we broke records. And congratulations, India, you are the #1 source of higher education students for the first year ever in the United States as of last year. Something you're never going to give back, I think, as a crown. But really, those would be the three areas, kind of aligned, aligned regulatory and credentialing regimes, ethical education and bringing ethics in, and really a focus, I think, on girls and women.
That's a wonderful answer, and just to speak to this idea of how we might do this, and I had a question about educational diplomacy, but you anticipated it, Eric, so I won't even have to ask it. It's so, you know, at ASU, where we have 7,000 Indian students, right? You can get some really good Indian food in Tempe, Arizona. Thank you very much, because we have wonderful, wonderful Indian students
Now we
there.
need to bring some good Mexican food here.
There we go.
Just to even it out.
That's the only thing I'm going to remember after this whole conversation. But it is a wonderful relationship that ASU has with these students coming over, but that's necessary but insufficient. So what we're doing now, instead of opening sort of 13 branch campuses here per se, but we're partnering through a company we have called Centana, which is this international company that we created to go to other universities around the world. We call them like mini-me Arizona State universities that want to be very innovative, very impactful, focusing on things like sustainability, and we allow our curriculum and our technology and our faculty to support them. And then those students start off here, Eric, and then they maybe for 2 years or 3 years. For Chikar, it's for 2 years, and they finish their degree in the United States at Arizona State. More undergraduate than graduate, so it's a different pool. And think about it, and as my colleague, Dr. Chikar mentioned, a person from Punjab who never thought they could go to school in the States because of the pricing model, they can go. And this is not a commercial brought to you about Arizona State University, but just thinking, and technology will be a big part of this, is how do we think about it differently to provide greater opportunity for others, especially for women? So I just wanted to point that out, and thank you in the embassy for supporting these types of concepts. When I thought about the relationship between India and the United States, you said it's complicated. I said we're kind of frenemies. We've been friends, we've been enemies, we've been friendly, we've been not so. But back to the point, it's an inflection point now in India. Why now? Why is the relationship between India and the United States so critical? And I think you can't answer that question without mentioning China, but please, I don't want to put words in your mouth.
No. And look, I would only say we're definitely not frenemies, and it's not complicated anymore. I think we actually are in love with each other. There's other countries involved too, I said that, and then the Australian ambassador said, we're already picking furniture out together. And I'm like, India, are you cheating on us with Australia? But we I think, have plenty of room for everybody. We should lose the romantic metaphor because it's going to be some sort of strange thing soon. But we are...
I'm going to remember that part of the conversation.
Exactly. We're focused on the way I think we have always been naturally aligned. We approach life, I think, in a similar way with our values. We have somewhat different manifestations of systems, but don't let, as Freud said, the narcissism of small differences focus us on that versus completely different systems like dictatorships, like extremism, like ideological, monochromatic cultures. We really do have so much in common. So that's one. Two, India, this is your moment. This was like America in the 1890s, right? When we're coming into this moment of world power. And for India, obviously, it's a return too. For the United States, it didn't exist before. But that sense of intense wealth being built up, of infrastructure being built out, of families who want to have an impact, of the politics kind of looking for stability and also trying to hang on to its principles. But this is the most populous country in the world. This is the fourth, coming on to the third largest economy in the world. This is a place where, if you look, it's the largest trading partner right now of India is the United States for the first time. We have, deep alignment on what we call ISET, the Initiative on Critical Emerging Technologies, which our two national security advisors put together just a year ago, and already in AI, quantum, space, semiconductors, telecoms, now climate and health. We have an alignment where we're saying, let's develop, again, these technologies to connect and protect rather than divide and harm people. In a way that can change the world, and we can export to third countries. India opens the door of the developing world in a way that America will never be completely as trusted. Vice versa, America opens the door with India to OECD countries. G20 was a perfect example of this. India did a marvelous job at the strongest G20 in history. Congratulations to our Indian friends. It was extraordinary
Bravo.
To see in every state of this amazing republic. But in the end, an agreement was drafted with language that nobody dissented from, because India did its job with certain countries and America did its job with other countries. So when I say this is a multiplicative relationship, we really can do more than we ever imagined together. Third thing I'd say is, if we don't go on this ride together, then who are we going on it with?
Yeah, well said.
And I challenge you to find any two countries in the world right now that are as big as us and as important as us, who have a growing relationship as strong as us. You can't come up with two. Not that are democracies. We have two other countries that say we have a relationship with no limits. Those two countries, Russia and China, have not really actually had a relationship based on friendship traditionally. So they have a relationship of convenience with no limits. What we've had is a relationship of true friendship with lots of limits. All we have to do is lose that second part. We're the converse of that. And I think the sky's the limit. In fact, no longer the sky's the limit. Literally from the seabed to the heavens, now that we're doing stuff in space together, we are collaborating, coordinating, and maybe have a chance to architect that future together.
And the Indians did a pretty amazing job of landing a space vessel on the moon. The Russians couldn't pull it off. They sort of crashed and burned, but all of us in America were cheering for our Indian friends in that regard. I was there with the
I was cheering for the Russians too. It's one place where we still
can
have,
all, yes.
You know, you have Russians and Americans up there on a space station together, even in the midst of when nations clash. It's one of the places where we're reminded that we can still try to be human beings first.
And our senator is Senator Kelly, and his brother are all great astronauts and Navy officers. So you're absolutely right. So I will not speak in a disparaging way, but I will say was very proud that Arizona State University was invited to the ISET negotiation or the announcement. Excuse me. I sat next to Reid Hoffman at LinkedIn, and it was Micron, it was Google, it was General Dynamics. And then it was MIT and Harvard and Stanford. It was Jake Sullivan and Jenna Raimondo and their equivalents in India. And Ambassador Sandhu was there that night at India House, and then he came to Tempe, to Arizona State University, about 3 weeks later to meet with his 6,000 or 7,000 friends. So thank you for bringing that up, and Americans need to stay on top of that and not backslide because we have a real opportunity. We're closing the last couple of minutes here. One more question around...
Oh, the clock's over there. I was wondering how long we had. There's no clock over here.
I'm just that good, Eric.
You're so good.
In my head, I have a clock.
You haven't lost one step.
But the role of innovation ecosystem. I'm only going to give you a minute or so. What can this innovation ecosystem do for India to catapult it into the next century?
So, you know, the innovation ecosystem is going to be everything here, as long as we get it to everybody here, and vice versa in the United States. We love some of the work we're doing. USAID, for instance, funds a couple different things here where we are able to help folks have filters on education to see where students need to do additional learning. We're looking at ways that we can be not competitors to all of you, but collaborators with you, and we invite you to learn more about that. We're doing work which is direct, you know, from the history of helping IITs be established to looking at the models of IIT now being in places like Tanzania and looking at the Pacific Island countries, Africa, the Indian Ocean region, and where we can have educational programs together. I'm going to put a particular emphasis again on keeping girls in school and seeing the things we can do to make sure that girls' families are supported when they do keep them in school. And I also think there's something, if I can close with this, you know, we have some of the most successful history, even when we weren't aligned in the geostrategic realm for decades. We had a very strong collaboration with India, first on food assistance, and then India insisted on not being aid, so paid in rupees that we couldn't take out of the country back then because it wasn't an exchangeable currency. So we put it back into India, establishing the IITs with India, really putting it behind grants for the first R&D that led to things like the Green Revolution here that allowed India to feed itself and now be one of the greatest exporters of agriculture in the world. Let's find that model, and a few years ago, India was like, maybe we don't need to be an aid recipient at all anymore, and USAID was going to pack up. US Congress wouldn't have anything of that, and the Indian government said, actually, we can collaborate a lot, but they established something called the Gandhi King Foundation. An act of Congress put $39 million that's sitting there right now. We're negotiating with the Indian government to help, how can we best spend this, and under the laws of the Home Ministry here. But once we get over that, which I'm confident we can, this is $39 million, and it will be replenished in the coming years from acts of Congress, we expect, to be able to spend on this relationship named after King and Gandhi. And I propose that we put this into equitable education around these technologies that are part of ISET, that we look at the challenges of our moment, whether that be climate change, whether that be gender equity, whether that be health security. We look at the emerging things that will define our world, how AI will function, what quantum computing will be used for, how telecommunications can link us instead of divide us, and so on and so forth. And take this be a pool for innovation and that kind of entrepreneurial spirit. And I invite you for some public-private partnerships around that. It's too early. Don't come to me with your pitches yet, because we got to establish this with India. But I hope one of the big leave-behinds I can have as ambassador is to have a whole new generation for the next 20 years of commitment from the U.S. side. And India's already committed to similar amounts of money, 20 million in the higher ed space with AAU and others in those 5 first critical areas, from agriculture to telecommunications to semiconductors and more. And to say, we look back on this moment, and yeah, there was a lot of money to make, there were a lot of systems to improve, there were a lot of people to educate, but the content of what we created didn't just change the architecture of education for Indians and for Americans, but really in the world itself. That is something worth striving for.
What a wonderful answer. Thank you very much, Ambassador Garcetti. I tell you, if you may recall, I saw Eric in our facility, ASU facility in Los Angeles, when you were literally counting down the days as mayor. I said, Eric, how's it going? He goes, 60 more days, my friend. But as you know, there was a long time between President Biden nominating Mayor Garcetti to be Ambassador Garcetti. But I will say on behalf of Indian citizens and U.S. citizens, you were worth the wait. Thank you very much for your service, my friend.
Thank you so much, everybody. Have a good evening.
Everybody, just quick thank you, Chris. Thank you, Ambassador, for that very thoughtful and inspiring conversation. And listening to Eric talk about the 5 Ps, the strong reminder of the power of education, innovation, principled innovation, and inclusive and consequential education.